Thanksgiving Eve, 1971. The Pacific Northwest was soaked in cold November rain. In Portland, Oregon, business travelers, families, and holiday passengers crowded into the small airport terminal, eager to get home. Among them was a man in a dark suit and black tie, carrying only a briefcase. He looked unremarkable, almost invincible, the kind of man you wouldn't glance at twice. He walked calmly to the gate for Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305, bound for Seattle. Paid cash for his ticket, seat 18C. Nothing about him stood out. No nervous tics, no hurry. Just a polite, middle-aged man who blended into the hum of travel. Minutes after takeoff, he would lean forward, hand a stewardess a note, and change American aviation forever. The note read, "Miss, I have a bomb." Hours later, after calmly sipping bourbon and lighting another Raleigh cigarette, he would strap on a parachute, step onto the lowered rear stairway of the Boeing 727, and leap into a freezing storm. Outside, pitch black sky. Below, endless forests, rivers, and mountains of Washington state. When the plane landed without him, the FBI launched one of the largest manhunts in US history. Helicopters scoured ridges for weeks. Troops trudged through forests. Agents pored over passenger lists. Yet they found nothing. Not a body, not a parachute, not a trace of the man who would come to be known as D.B. Cooper. To this day, no one knows who he was or if he survived. Was he a desperate man chasing freedom? A criminal mastermind who outsmarted the system? Or just a ghost swallowed by the storm? To understand the man who boarded as Dan Cooper, we first need to step back into the world of 1971, a restless America on the edge of change. America in 1971 was a nation on edge. The Vietnam War dragged into its sixth year, sending tens of thousands of young men overseas while protests exploded in cities and on college campuses. Trust in government was crumbling. President Richard Nixon spoke of law and order, but every night Americans turned on the evening news to see images of chaos, marches, clashes, and a war that seemed endless. At the same time, the skies themselves had become a stage for rebellion. Commercial flights were surprisingly casual. You could buy a ticket with cash at the counter, no ID, no security checks, no scanners, no bag searches. Passengers strolled into planes carrying briefcases, lighters, even firearms without anyone blinking an eye. That openness came at a cost. Hijackings weren't just possible, they were common. In 1971 alone, more than 30 commercial flights in the United States were hijacked. Some were political statements, desperate men demanding flights to Cuba. Others were purely criminal, quick cash grabs where hijackers demanded ransom and then surrendered. Newspapers ran headlines about skyjackings so often that the public grew almost numb. It was dangerous, yes, but it had become part of the cultural background noise. And yet, into this chaotic landscape stepped a man who would outwit them all, a A man who executed a plan so bold, so clean, and so mysterious that it would leave the FBI baffled for decades. Which brings us to November 24th, 1971, and the mysterious passenger in seat 18C. It was the day before Thanksgiving, November 24th, 1971. At Portland International Airport, travelers bustled through the terminal, eager to get home for the holiday. Flights were running as usual, security was non existent by today's standards, and no one gave a second glance to a middle aged man carrying only a briefcase. He purchased a one way ticket to Seattle at the counter. Cash, $20. The name on the slip, Dan Cooper. Reporter James Long of the Oregon Journal mistakenly added the abbreviation DB, forever immortalizing him as DB Cooper. Witnesses described him as unremarkable at first glance, mid-40s, about 6 feet tall, neatly dressed in a dark suit and skinny black tie with polished shoes. He wore a raincoat against the November chill and dark sunglasses that lent him an air of quiet confidence. Nothing about him suggested danger. In fact, the ticket agent later recalled he was polite, almost charming. When he boarded Flight 305, a Boeing 727 bound for Seattle, he settled into seat 18C, near the rear of the plane. He ordered a bourbon and a 7-Up soda, lit a Raleigh cigarette, and flipped through magazines as if he was another weary businessman heading home for the holiday. But appearances can be deceiving. Inside that briefcase was something that would soon hold an entire flight and the FBI hostage to his plan. What the flight crew didn't know yet was that they weren't ferrying passengers to Seattle. They were flying into the middle of one of the boldest heists in American history. The flight from Portland to Seattle was scheduled to last just 30 minutes. For most passengers, it was routine. But for the man in seat 18C, this wasn't a trip. It was the stage for something unprecedented. At approximately 3 p.m., as the plane leveled in the grey November skies, Cooper leaned towards a stewardess named Florence Kaffner. He quietly handed her a folded note. She assumed it was a phone number from a lonely businessman and slipped it into her pocket without looking. Cooper leaned closer and whispered, "Miss, you better read that note. I have a bomb." When Schaffner opened it, her heart skipped. The message, written in neat block letters, confirmed his words. Cooper slowly cracked open his briefcase, just enough for her to see red sticks of dynamite, wires, and a battery. Calm but firm, Cooper dictated his demands. $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck waiting in Seattle to refuel the plane. He warned her not to raise any alarms, saying, "No funny business or I'll do the job." What's remarkable is how composed he remained. Witnesses later recalled he was never reckless, never cruel. He ordered another bourbon, lit another cigarette, and reassured the crew he wouldn't hurt anyone. It was business, nothing personal. Down the aisle, the rest of the cabin carried on in ignorance. Most passengers had no idea the man in the dark suit beside them had just seized control of their flight. By the time Flight 305 touched down in Seattle, the entire city was bracing for the unimaginable. A hijacker who seemed to know exactly what he was doing. As Flight 305 circled Seattle for nearly 2 hours, tension ripped through the city below. The FBI scrambled to gather Cooper's demands: $200,000 in unmarked $20 bills and 4 parachutes, 2 main, 2 reserve. The money was quickly withdrawn from a local bank, each bill photographed for future tracing. The parachutes were collected from a nearby skydiving school. On board, Cooper remained eerily calm. He smoked, sipped bourbon, and spoke politely to the crew. Flight attendant Tina Marklow later remembered, "He was thoughtful and kind, not cruel or nasty. For a man holding 36 lives hostage, he seemed almost unnervingly collected." Most of the passengers still had no idea what was happening. They were only told that their arrival was delayed due to a minor mechanical issue. Cooper insisted on their discretion, and the crew obeyed. At 5:39 p.m., the plane finally touched down in Seattle. The tension in the cockpit was thick. Ground crews delivered the cash and parachutes in 2 large duffel bags, placing them near the aircraft's rear stairway. Outside, FBI snipers watched from the shadows, their scopes trained on the jet's glowing windows. But Cooper had anticipated this. He demanded the plane taxi to a remote corner of the runway, away from spotlights and cameras. There would be no heroics, no sudden rush. He knew the risks and controlled them completely. Once the ransom was secured on board, Cooper released the 36 passengers unharmed. One by one, they stepped out into the storm, confused but relieved, shuffling across the wet tarmac under watchful eyes. For them, the ordeal was over. But for Cooper and the skeleton crew still on board, the most dangerous part of the plan was only beginning. With his money in hand and parachutes at the ready, Cooper now issued his final orders, ones that will set the stage for the most daring escape in aviation history. With the passengers safe and ransom secured, Cooper's tone shifted from polite to precise. He ordered the crew to take off again. Destination, Mexico City. But he wasn't interested in the beaches of Mexico. His real plan lay in the skies above the Pacific Northwest. He gave specific instructions that revealed a startling knowledge of aviation. 1. The plane was to fly no higher than 10,000 feet. 2. The speed was to remain at no more than 200 knots. 3. The landing gear was to stay down. 4. Flaps lowered at 15 degrees. And lastly, the cabin was not to be pressurized. For the pilots, these were bizarre, dangerous demands, but they complied. Outside, the storm intensified. Heavy rain lashed at the fuselage. Winds buffeted the aircraft, and in the cockpit, the crew exchanged silent glances. They knew what was coming. At 8 p.m., somewhere near Seattle and Reno, Cooper made his move. He sent the flight attendants forward to the cockpit and remained alone in the rear of the plane. A red warning light flashed on the pilot's panel. The aft stairs had been lowered mid-flight. Tina Marklow later recalled hearing the roar of air through the cabin as the pressure equalized, and then nothing but the storm. At 8:13 p.m., the jet gave a sudden upward jolt. Pilots in the cockpit felt it immediately, as though the aircraft had been violently shoved from behind. They believed it was the moment Cooper left. The conditions could not have been worse. Freezing rain, 200 miles per hour winds, blackness so complete it erased the horizon. Below him stretched miles of dense forest, rivers, and rugged mountains. It was the kind of jump that is the stuff of nightmares for even elite paratroopers. And yet, Cooper vanished into it. No distress call, no sightings, no recovery. Just a man, a parachute, and $200,000 in cash, gone into the storm. When the 727 landed safely in Reno hours later, Cooper was gone. No trace of him, just an empty seat, a discarded tie, and an unsolved mystery that would haunt the FBI for decades. By dawn on November 25, 1971, the manhunt was already in motion. Cooper's leap had set off one of the largest search operations in US history. Hundreds of FBI agents, state troopers, and military personnel descended on the rugged wilderness of Washington and Oregon. Helicopters combed the forests. Boats patrolled the Columbia River. Dogs traced the brush. Every farmhouse, hunting cabin, and back road was scrutinized. Yet not a single trace of Cooper or his parachute was found. The FBI soon discovered that Cooper had chosen his equipment carefully. Of the 4 parachutes provided, he took 2. One of them being a training chute that was mistakenly included, rigged and unusable. Was it deliberate misdirection or a fatal error? The question has haunted investigators ever since. Back on the ground, the Bureau launched a massive investigation. They interviewed over 800 suspects. They checked every known parachutist, every disgruntled airline employee, every military veteran with jump training. The codename given to the case, NOJAC, short for Northwest Hijacking. The evidence was maddeningly thin. All they had was a black tie Cooper left behind, a mother-of-pearl tie clip, a few hair strands, and the vague recollections of passengers who never even realized they'd been hijacked. But what the Bureau lacked in hard evidence, they made up for with sheer persistence. For years, agents followed every tip and rumor, from prison confessions to barroom boasts. They drained lakes, they excavated fields, they even sent divers into the Columbia River, convinced the ransom might have sunk to the bottom. And yet, nothing, nobody, no parachute, no clear trail. The public, meanwhile, was electrified. Newspapers plastered Cooper's sketch across front pages. TV anchors replayed the story night after night. Radio call-ins buzzed with theories. Was he a seasoned paratrooper, a disgruntled airline worker, or just a man crazy enough to roll the dice on a stormy night? The mystery only deepened in 1980 when a young boy camping along the Columbia River uncovered a bundle of rotting $20 bills buried in the sand, money that matched Cooper's ransom. Was it a breadcrumb or a planted diversion? Still, the trail ended there. The FBI's investigation stretched for decades, but with each passing year, the man in the black suit slipped further into myth. And as the official search stalled, the public's obsession grew, fueling theories that turned ordinary men into prime suspects. FBI agents may have packed away their files, but for the public, the case never ended. Over time, D.B. Cooper stopped being just a criminal. He became a folk hero. Songs were written about him. Bars sold D.B. Cooper cocktails. Novels and films painted him as the ultimate anti-establishment outlaw. To many, Cooper wasn't a villain. He was the man who beat the system, the rogue who slipped through the cracks of authority at a time when trust in government was eroding. Cooper became more than a name. He became a symbol, a reflection of America's fascination with rebellion, with a dream of disappearing from a broken world and starting fresh. In an age of cynicism, he was mythologized as the last outlaw of the skies. But beyond the myth was the impact. Cooper's hijacking didn't just capture imaginations, it forced change. Airlines no longer handed over parachutes without question. Boarding security was overhauled, and a small device named the Cooper vane was installed on commercial aircrafts to prevent anyone from lowering a rear staircase mid-flight ever again. For decades, amateur sleuths, journalists, and conspiracy theorists kept the fire burning. Cooper wasn't just a story tucked away in FBI archives. He was an obsession that spanned generations. And yet, for all the theories, for all the books and documentaries, one truth has never changed. The man in seat 18C still hasn't given up his secret. But while Cooper's legacy grew in culture, the FBI never stopped searching for answers, and the suspects they pursued, some convincing, some outrageous, kept the mystery alive. The FBI chased the case for decades. More than 800 suspects were considered. Ex-cons, pilots, conmen, war veterans, even teachers. But only a few names ever rose to the level of serious suspicion. First, Richard McCoy, a Vietnam veteran, helicopter pilot, and a man who staged his own hijacking just months after Cooper's. In April 1972, McCoy hijacked a United Airlines jet, demanded $500,000, and parachuted out of the rear stairs, almost a carbon copy of Cooper's method. He was caught within days, convicted, and later killed in a prison escape. Some agents swore McCoy was Cooper, but others pointed out his age, his appearance, and the fact that he was in Utah on the day of the 1971 hijacking contradictory. For many, McCoy was a copycat, not the original. And then, there's Robert Ruxo, another Vietnam veteran, decorated but troubled, with skills in explosives and parachuting. He had the training, the nerves, and the temperament. For years, journalists pursued him, convinced he was the man who leapt into the storm. But the FBI eventually ruled him out, citing insufficient evidence. Rackstraw himself, in interviews, seemed to enjoy the attention, once coyly saying, "If I'm not D.B. Cooper, but I could have been." There were others too. Every decade brought a new prime suspect, from petty criminals to respected professionals. But each theory unraveled under scrutiny, leaving Cooper's shadow in it. And here's where the legend deepens. What if Cooper survived? If he walked away from that jump, he'd be in his 90s today. Perhaps an old man living quietly, watching his myth grow from the sidelines. Or perhaps he didn't survive at all, his body swallowed by the woods and rivers of the Pacific Northwest. The truth is simple. No one knows. And maybe that's why Cooper endures. He isn't just a criminal in a case file. He's a riddle, a blank canvas onto which every generation paints its own version of rebellion, dareness, and escape. But whether he died in the cold November night or lived to raise a glass to his own legend, one fact is certain. Cooper's jump didn't just vanish into the storm. It reshaped our skies forever.